It's Drake Maye versus the Jaguars in London. So the Jaguars defense is on pace to allow 39 passing touchdowns this season, the most points, 24 points. Not only showed some nice rushing numbers, 5 carries, 38 yards, but had passing touchdowns of 6, 35, and 40 yards, showing that there's some talent in the Pats receiving room. So I think if you're in a bind in 2QB or Superflex leagues, either with Caleb or Dak Prescott out, or even if you're feeling iffy about Matthew Stafford, I think May is a really good streamer against a brutal Jags defense.
Like, this is a fantastic spot for Drake Maye. Like, I love this matchup.
And they've allowed a decent amount of rushing yards to every QB that they've played. And we talked about it yesterday, Fab. Yep. Like, it's a sneaky, low-key aspect of Drake Maye's game.
100%. They've surrendered 14 passing touchdowns, most in the NFL, and 277 yards per game passing, also most in the NFL. So, Roger, I echo your sentiments 100%. Pop is in a top matchup where he can put up legit wide receiver 2 numbers, maybe even wide receiver 1 if things break right. But I think honestly, I think he's a must start. If you grab him off waiver wire this week, you put him in your lineup, you will not be disappointed. I really see him having a great day.
Why do they call him Pop?
I was worried Fab was going to make a snap crackle pop.
Yeah, I know. That's why I was racing to make my comment, but why do they call him Pop for real?
I'm not going to lie. I wrote that
like Rice
sentence
Krispies, or
I didn't realize that it rhymed, but that's fine. I don't know why he's called Pop. We'll have to get Nick Boras, our resident. Hold on a second.
It's a player that I really like, but in a tough situation. Courtland Sutton at the Saints on a Thursday nighter. So Sutton will be facing off against the Saints defense that is allowing the 3rd most passing yards in the league and the 5th most receptions to wide receivers. He scored a touchdown in 2 of the last 3 games and is tied for 3rd in the league in red zone targets. But I see this as a really nice spot for Sutton. He's not going to get many catches, but he finds the end zone. Maybe like a 3-catch, 60-yard game, 1 touchdown.
Last 4 weeks on a points per game basis, he's actually QB 16, which is ahead of Kirk Cousins, Jalen Hurts, Lawrence, Rodgers, and Kyler. He's been very serviceable in Superflex and 2QB leagues, but I think this might be the week where you have to bench him versus the New Orleans defense, giving up the 8th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks. You take away Baker's game last week, and New Orleans have only surrendered 1 passing touchdown all season.
That's wild.
They stifled the likes of Mahomes, Cousins, Hurts, Dak, and kept them all under 15 fantasy points. Bo can get it done with his legs, which might salvage his game for him. But apart from that, I think Bo's taking a seat on my bench and finishing outside the top 20 for QBs.
Yeah, it's the last 2 games. I had mentioned it. It's 1,054 yards over the past 2 games, 500 with the Bucks, and I think almost 400 against the Chiefs.
My next matchup that I love this week is Baker Mayfield versus Baltimore Monday Night Football. Guys, Baker has been cooking. He's QB2 on the year. He's only half a point behind Lamar. He went up against a tough New Orleans defense last week and put up 32 points, 4 touchdowns. Yeah, he threw 3 interceptions, but still, he got it done when he needed to get it done. Baltimore is not a scary pass defense. They've been giving up the 2nd most points to opposing quarterbacks this season. And when tested versus competent QBs, they've broken, not just bent. So Tampa Bay offense right now is rolling like a well-oiled machine. This could turn into a shootout, which I think will help Baker and company hit fantasy football pay dirt. He's a QB1 for me this week.
Yeah, so I went tight end heavy this week for both my segments. First love I've got is Brock Bowers at the LA Rams. His target production has skyrocketed in the last 2 weeks with Adams being out. So with him now being traded to the Jets, Bowers becomes the undisputed number 1 option in that Raiders offense. 22 targets in the last 2 weeks and 39.8 total fantasy points. So he's been a machine. I actually got to witness that firsthand on Sunday. He is huge, and he looks really, really good, man. This guy's going to be a good tight end for a long time. And he gets a Rams team giving up the 2nd most points to tight ends. So I like Sam LaPorta. Been very, very disappointing, obviously. Most likely went off the board as early as the 2nd round in most drafts. And this is kind of the reason why Raj and a lot of people don't like drafting tight ends this high, because things like this could happen and then you kind of get screwed. He has yet to breach 5 targets in a game. That when I read that today, I found that pretty unbelievable. But the Vikings do give up the 7th most points to tight ends, and this game could become a shootout in Minnesota. So I think I'm looking for LaPorta to finally come to life and have a huge impact on this game. Like if not now, when?
On to my 2 hates this week. I have Mr. David Montgomery at Minnesota.
Whoa.
Yep, this is a big call. So man's been on fire in 2024. 5 straight games of 15 plus fantasy points, 6 rushing touchdowns on the season. Currently RB10, but I think the fun stops this week. Divisional away game. Mini are giving up the second fewest points to running backs. Only surrendered 1 rushing touchdown, which leads the NFL, and 67 rushing yards per game, second least in the NFL. Monty doesn't catch as much, which again further limits his upside in this tough matchup. And I think he finishes outside the top 15 this week. He's a low end RB2, in my opinion.
I mean, it's fair.
Murray versus the Chargers. The Chargers are giving up 13 fantasy points per game to QBs, the 4th fewest passing yards in the league. And I think we'd all agree that Kyler Murray's play has been extremely uninspiring and inconsistent, despite being the QB8 on the season. He's had 14 or fewer fantasy points per game in 4 of his 6 games. And obviously we saw that Marvin Harrison is in concussion protocol. I believe this is a Monday nighter, so he does have time to recover. But the outlook for week 7 is iffy if we look at what happened with Malik Neighbors. Even with Harrison, the Cardinals' offense has been lacking an identity and is not getting the ball consistently to their playmakers, be it Harrison or Wilson. So I think Kyler has to utilize his legs more. And I just don't see him as a set it and forget it QB1 in 1 QB leagues. And I think there's combinations in 2 QB and Superflex leagues where I wouldn't mind sitting him.
When does Call of Duty come out? Yeah.
So no, from a passing perspective, he hasn't been all that great. So yeah, I don't disagree with this call at all.
Yep.
Who's your second matchup that you hate, Roger?
Yeah, second matchup I hate is James Cook versus the Titans. The Titans have actually had a really strong defense in 2024, be it against the pass or the run, but especially against running backs. They've allowed the 5th fewest yards per game to running backs and only a 3.32 yards per carry average and 1 rushing touchdown. The last time they faced a running QB, which was Malik Willis, they allowed him to run for 6 times for 73 yards and a TD. So I could see Josh Allen taking advantage of that weakness. But in our home league, obviously the Bush League, I'm likely to sit Cook, who's dealing with a minor toe injury, and start mixing Josh Jacobs or even Dobbins instead.
First hate of the week is going to be my boy Pat Freiermuth versus the Jets on Sunday Night Football. So as we mentioned above at the beginning of the pod, Tomlin came out and said Russell Wilson is taking first team snaps. So it all signs pointing to him starting on Monday Night Football. It's been a fairly disappointing season after signing a big extension in the offseason, 4-year deal. And if Wilson does start, things might be getting worse for him before they get better. Wilson doesn't like throwing too much to the middle of the field. So I don't see him as a real strong play. And then add the fact that the Jets are giving up the 7th fewest fantasy points to TDs. I think this has stinker written all over it.
Yeah. And
second hate for the week, again, staying on the tight end train, is going to be Tucker Kraft versus the Texans. He came back down to earth a little bit in week 6 with his 3.5 points. That offense is a very different weekly performer oriented, man. Like it's just going to be there's one guy who's it's basically Reed and Josh Jacobs who are trustworthy, or more trustworthy, I should say. But or else one week it's Wicks and the other weeks it's Dobbs, and Dobbs go off for 2 touchdowns last week.
Yes.
And it's around and around we go. So it's like it's a merry-go-round, I feel, in that offense. And I don't think week 7 is Kraft's week. Houston's giving up the 3rd fewest points to tight ends.